Jake Morrison looked out the window of the transport ship as Kepler Station grew larger in front of him. The massive space station spun slowly against the backdrop of stars, its silver hull catching the light from the nearby sun. He had been traveling for 3 weeks to get here, and now his new assignment was finally beginning. The young lieutenant adjusted his uniform and checked his bags one more time. Everything he owned for the next 6 months was packed in 2 simple cases. His orders were clear, but seemed almost too easy. He would teach basic survival skills to alien students at the Galactic Educational Institute. It was part of the Human-Alien Cultural Exchange Program, something that had started only 2 years ago when humans first joined the Galactic Community. Jake had volunteered for the program because it seemed interesting. He had grown up in Colorado, spending most of his childhood camping and hiking with his father in the Rocky Mountains. After joining the military, he had worked as a survival instructor for new recruits, teaching young aliens the same basic skills he taught human soldiers. Should be simple enough that the transport ship docked with a soft bump that Jake barely felt. He gathered his belongings and walked through the airlock into Kepler Station. The first thing that hit him was how different everything looked. The corridors were much wider than on human ships, and the ceiling was higher. Strange symbols covered the walls, glowing softly in colors he had never seen before. As he walked toward the main hub, Jake saw his first aliens up close. A group of tall, thin creatures with blue skin walked past him, their movements graceful and flowing. Their eyes were large and dark, and they spoke to each other in musical tones that sounded like wind chimes. Behind them came a shorter, stockier being that looked like it was made of living rock, its surface gray and rough like granite. Jake tried not to stare, but everything was so new and fascinating. He had seen pictures and videos during his briefing, but experiencing it in person was completely different. The air even smelled different here, with a clean, metallic scent that reminded him of rain on nettle. A soft voice behind him said, "Lieutenant Morrison, I presume?" Jake turned around to see one of the most unusual beings he had ever encountered. The creature was about his height, but had 4 arms instead of 2. Its skin looked like it was made of living crystal, reflecting light in rainbow patterns as it moved. The being wore what appeared to be academic robes in deep purple. "Yes, that's me," Jake replied, extending his hand in greeting. The alien looked at his hand for a moment with confusion, and carefully reached out with one of its 4 hands to shake it. "I am Professor Zixtal," the alien said in perfect English, though with a strange accent that made each word sound like it was being sung. "I will be your teaching partner during your time here. Welcome to Kepler Station and the Galactic Educational Institute." Jake smiled. "Thank you, Professor. I'm looking forward to working with you. This place is incredible." Professor Zixtal's crystalline features seemed to brighten. "You are very kind. Come, let me show you to your quarters, and then we can discuss your curriculum." As they walked through the station, Professor Zixtal explained how the institute worked. Students came from all over the galaxy to learn various subjects. The survival course that Jake would be teaching was considered one of the most challenging programs offered. Most students found it very difficult, and many failed to complete it. "The failure rate is quite high," Professor Zixtal admitted as they rode a lift to the residential section. "Approximately 60% of students do not pass the course. It requires skills that most species find very challenging to master." Jake was surprised. "Really? What makes it so hard?" "The course covers basic shelter construction, water location and purification, food identification, and emergency signaling," the professor explained. "These are complex skills that require extensive study and practice." Jake nodded, though privately he wondered what could be so difficult about those topics. They seemed like basic knowledge that anyone should have. His father had taught him most of those skills when he was just 8 years Old during their camping trips. Professor Zixtal showed him to a comfortable room with a large window overlooking space. The furniture was adjustable to accommodate different alien body types, which Jake found thoughtful. After he unpacked his few belongings, they went to review the curriculum in the professor's office. The office was filled with strange devices and books, written in languages Jake couldn't read. Professor Zixtal pulled up a holographic display showing the standard survival course outline. Jake studied it carefully, reading through each lesson plan and assignment. "This looks straightforward," Jake said after reviewing everything. "How long does the course usually take?" "A full academic cycle," Professor Zixtal replied. "Approximately 6 months of intensive study. The theoretical portions take about 4 months, followed by 2 months of practical application." Jake raised an eyebrow. 6 months for this material? Professor Zixtal's forearms moved in. What Jake was learning was a gesture of concern. "Is there a problem, Lieutenant Morrison? I understand that human educational methods may be different from ours." "Oh, no problem at all," Jake said quickly. "I'm just used to covering this material much faster. But I'm sure we can work with your established timeline." What Jake didn't say was that he could probably teach everything in the curriculum. During a single weekend camping trip, the material covered basic outdoor skills that every human child learned for safety. He wondered if maybe the alien students were just very slow learners, or if their species weren't naturally good at practical skills. Professor Zixtal seemed relieved. "Excellent. Your reputation precedes you, Lieutenant Morrison. We have heard that humans are remarkably adaptable. The faculty is very curious to observe your teaching methods." "My reputation?" Jake asked, confused. "Oh, yes," the professor said, its crystal skin shimmering with excitement. "Humans are known throughout the galaxy as survivors. Your species has adapted to one of the most dangerous planets ever discovered. The stories of human endurance and adaptability are quite famous." Jake felt uncomfortable with the praise. Earth didn't seem particularly dangerous to him. Sure, there were storms and wild animals and natural disasters, but every planet probably had similar challenges. Humans just learned to deal with them, the same way any intelligent species would. "I think those stories might be a bit exaggerated," Jake said modestly. "We just do what we have to do to get by." Professor Zixtal made a sound that might have been laughter. Such humility. "This is exactly what we expected from a human instructor. Tomorrow you will meet your students. I think you will find them eager but nervous. The survival course has quite a reputation for difficulty." That evening, Jake ate dinner in the station's main cafeteria. He watched dozens of different alien species eating together, talking, and studying. Some looked like plants that could walk, others like jellyfish that floated through the air. A few looked almost human, except for small differences like extra eyes or unusual skin colors. As he prepared for bed, Jake reviewed his lesson plans one more time. The first week would cover basic principles and safety procedures. Then they would move into practical exercises. He had decided to start with a simple survival simulation to see what the students already knew. Looking out at the stars, Jake felt excited about the challenge ahead. Teaching aliens would certainly be different from instructing human soldiers. But the basic principles were the same. Everyone needed to know how to take care of themselves in an emergency. He had no idea that his definition of basic principles was about to completely change how the galaxy thought about education and survival. Jake woke up early on his first day of teaching, feeling excited and nervous at the same time. He had spent the night thinking about how to make his first class interesting for the alien students. After a quick breakfast in the cafeteria, he met Professor Zixtal outside the main classroom. "Are you ready to meet your students?" the professor asked, its forearms moving in what Jake now recognized as a gesture of anticipation. "Absolutely," Jake replied, straightening his uniform. "I'm looking forward to it." They entered a large, circular classroom with seats arranged in tiers around a central teaching area. 24 young aliens sat waiting, representing 12 different species that Jake had studied during his preparation. He recognized most of them from his briefing materials, but seeing them in person was still amazing. In the front row sat 3 Etherians, delicate beings with gossamer wings that shimmered like soap bubbles. Their bodies were thin and graceful, almost see-through in places. Behind them were 4 rock-born, stocky creatures with skin that looked like living stone. Their eyes glowed softly in the dim light, and Jake could hear a faint grinding sound when they moved. The Tidewalkers occupied a special section with extra humidity. Their translucent blue skin seemed to ripple like water, and they breathed through gills on their necks. Near the back sat several wind callers, tall beings with feathered crests that moved constantly, as if blown by an invisible breeze. Other species filled the remaining seats. Jake saw students with scales, fur, metallic skin, and some with features. So alien he couldn't easily describe them. Despite their differences, they all shared the same expression: nervous excitement mixed with worry. "Good morning, everyone," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the room's excellent acoustics. "I'm Lieutenant Jake Morrison, and I'll be your instructor for this survival course. I know this class has a reputation for being difficult, but I want you to know that everything we'll learn together is completely manageable." One of the Etherians raised a delicate hand. "Sir, is it true that you learned these skills as a child on your homeworld?" "Yes, that's right," Jake answered. "My father started teaching me basic outdoor skills when I was about 8 years old. Most human children learn these things for safety." The students exchanged glances, and Jake could hear quiet whispers in several different languages. Professor Zixtal watched from the side of the room, its crystalline features reflecting the classroom lights. "Now," Jake continued, "instead of starting with theory, I thought we'd jump right into a practical exercise. I believe the best way to learn is by doing." More whispers filled the room. A rock-born student spoke up, its voice sounding like gravel rolling down a hill. "Sir, shouldn't we study the theoretical foundations first? Professor Zixtal usually spends the first month on basic principles." Jake waved his hand dismissively. "Don't worry about theory right now. You'll learn the principles naturally as we practice. I've arranged for us to use the station's holographic training deck for a simple survival simulation." Professor Zixtal stepped forward, looking concerned. "Lieutenant Morrison, perhaps we should discuss this approach. The simulation you're describing is typically reserved for advanced students in their final cycle." "Advanced?" Jake looked genuinely puzzled. "It's just basic camping." "How advanced could it be?" The alien professor's 4 arms moved in what Jake was learning meant serious worry. "The simulation involves being stranded on an unknown planet with minimal resources. Students must establish shelter, locate water, identify safe food sources, and signal for rescue. Most of our advanced students struggle with these challenges even after months of preparation." Jake smiled reassuringly. "That sounds perfect. Real, hands-on experience is exactly what they need." What Jake didn't understand was that his idea of a simple camping trip was about to reveal just how different human capabilities were from those of other galactic species. An hour later, the entire class stood in the holographic training deck. The room had transformed into a realistic alien landscape with rolling hills, scattered trees, and a small stream running through a valley. The simulation computer had scattered basic supplies around the area: some rope, a few tools, emergency rations for 2 days, and basic first aid materials. "All right, everyone," Jake announced. "Here's the scenario. Your transport crashed during a storm. The rescue ship won't arrive for 7 days. You have some supplies, but not enough food or shelter for a week. Your job is to survive until help arrives." The alien students looked around at the landscape with expressions of panic. Several Etherians huddled together, their wings trembling. The Rockborn students moved to examine the scattered supplies, but seemed uncertain about what to do with them. "Where do we start?" asked the Tidewalker, its voice bubbling with anxiety. "Well," Jake said, looking around the simulated environment, "first we need to assess our situation. We have water from the stream, but we'll need to purify it. We need shelter from the weather, and we'll need to supplement our food supplies. Let's start with shelter, since that's usually the most urgent need." Jake walked over to a grove of trees and began examining the branches. "These look sturdy enough," he said, grabbing a fallen branch and testing its strength. "We can use these for the frame." The students watched in fascination as Jake quickly selected several branches of different sizes. He tested each one by bending it slightly, listening to the sound it made, and examining the bark for signs of disease or weakness. "How do you know which branches to choose?" asked an Etherian student. "Experience," Jake replied. "You learn to recognize strong wood versus weak wood. See how this one sounds hollow when I tap it? That means it's probably rotted inside. This one has solid bark and feels heavy for its size, so it's likely healthy." Within minutes, Jake had gathered enough materials for a basic shelter frame. He began weaving smaller branches between the larger ones, creating a framework that could support covering materials. "Now we need something to keep the rain out," he said, looking around. "Those broad leaves over there should work." Jake demonstrated how to layer the leaves like shingles, starting from the bottom and working upward so water would run off instead of leaking through. The alien students watched in amazement as a weatherproof shelter took shape in less than an hour. "This is impossible," whispered one of the Rockborn. "The construction techniques alone should take days to master." Jake overheard and laughed. "This is just basic stuff. My dad taught me this when I was 9. It's not complicated once you understand the principles." Next, Jake turned his attention to water. He walked to the stream and knelt down, cupping some water in his hands and examining it closely. He smelled it, looked at its color, and even tasted a small amount. "This water looks clean, but we should purify it anyway," he said. "Stream water can contain parasites or bacteria that might make you sick." Jake gathered some sand and gravel from the stream bank, along with pieces of cloth from the emergency supplies. He showed the students how to create a simple filtration system using layers of different materials. "The cloth catches the big particles," he explained, as he poured stream water through his improvised filter. "The sand catches smaller particles, and the gravel helps with flow. It's not perfect, but it removes most of the dangerous stuff." The filtered water came out noticeably clearer than it went in. Jake then showed them how to boil the water using a metal container from the supplies and a fire he built using sticks and dry grass. "Fire is easy once you know the trick," he said, spinning a stick rapidly against a piece of dry wood. "You need 3 things: heat, fuel, and oxygen. The spinning creates heat, the dry grass is fuel, and blowing gently provides oxygen." Smoke began rising from the wood, then small flames appeared. Jake carefully fed the fire with gradually larger pieces of wood until he had a steady blaze going. The alien students stared at the fire with expressions ranging from wonder to terror. Several of the Tidewalkers backed away, clearly uncomfortable. "With the flames, have you never seen fire before?" Jake asked, noticing their reactions. "Fire is extremely dangerous," one Tidewalker replied. "On our world, we use only controlled energy sources. Wild combustion like this is considered too unpredictable." Jake nodded understandingly. "I guess different planets have different approaches. On Earth, fire is a basic survival tool. Every human child learns fire safety and how to build one properly. As the first day of the simulation continued, Jake demonstrated skill after skill that left the alien students speechless. He identified edible plants by their appearance and smell, showed them how to make rope from plant fibers, and even caught fish from the stream using a spear he carved from a straight branch. "How do you know which plants are safe to eat?" asked a wind caller student. "Mostly experience and education," Jake replied. "But there are some general rules. Plants with milky sap are usually poisonous. Bright colors often warn of toxins. You can test unfamiliar plants by rubbing them on your skin first, then your lips, then your tongue, waiting for reactions at each step." By the end of the first day, Jake had established a comfortable base camp with waterproof shelter, clean water, and enough food for several days. What he thought was basic camping knowledge had left 24 alien students staring at him like he was performing magic. Professor Zixtal watched from the observation area. "It's Krista." By the third day of the survival simulation, news about Jake's class had spread throughout Kepler Station like wildfire. Professor Zixtal had mentioned the unusual teaching methods to a few colleagues, and word traveled quickly through the academic community. What had started as routine curiosity had turned into genuine amazement and confusion about Dr. Veltar, a respected Zephyrian who had been teaching environmental sciences for over 40 years, was the first outside observer to visit the training deck. She arrived expecting to see struggling students and basic instruction. Instead, she found Jake demonstrating advanced techniques that she had never seen before. "Watch the smoke," Jake was telling his students as he pointed to a small fire. "See how it's moving toward the west? That tells us the wind is coming from the east. If you know the wind direction, you can predict weather changes." The alien students gathered around, taking notes and asking questions. A young rockborn raised its hand. "How can wind direction predict weather?" "Weather systems move in patterns," Jake explained simply. "On most planets, storms approach from certain directions. If you know the local patterns, you can prepare for bad weather before it hits. My grandfather taught me this when I was about 10 years old." Dr. Veltar watched in stunned silence. What Jake was describing was advanced meteorology, something she taught to graduate students after years of study. Yet he was presenting it as childhood knowledge, and somehow making it completely understandable to first year students. Jake continued the lesson by showing the students how to build a weather shelter. He selected branches with specific characteristics, wove them together in a complex pattern, and created a structure that could withstand strong winds and heavy rain. "The key is understanding stress distribution," he said as he worked. "You want the force of the wind to spread across the entire structure, not concentrate on one weak point." Dr. Veltar's 3 eyes widened in shock. Stress distribution was a graduate-level engineering concept. How could this human instructor treat it as basic knowledge? As the day progressed, more faculty members found excuses to observe Jake's class. Professor Hinthal from the biology department watched Jake teach the students to identify animal tracks in the mud near the stream. "This print shows 4 toes with claw marks," Jake explained, pointing to marks in the soft earth. "The depth tells us the animal's approximate weight. The spacing between prints tells us its speed when it passed through here." Jake followed the tracks for a few meters, then stopped and pointed to a tree. "See those scratch marks about shoulder high? This animal uses this tree to mark its territory. That means we should set up our camp somewhere else to avoid confrontation." The alien students listened intently, completely absorbed in Jake's explanation. Professor Hinthal found herself taking notes, despite having studied animal behavior. For decades, the human's practical knowledge was unlike anything in the academic literature. "How do you know so much about animal behavior?" asked an Etherian student. "Basic safety," Jake replied with a shrug. "On Earth, Large animals can be dangerous if you surprise them or invade their territory. Every human child learns to recognize signs of animal activity and how to avoid problems. Professor Hintel felt dizzy. What Jake described as basic safety was the foundation of her entire academic specialty. She had spent years studying animal territorial behavior, and here was a human treating it as elementary knowledge that children should know. Word of Jake's unusual capabilities reached the department heads by the fourth day. Dean Morthick, the senior administrator of the Galactic Educational Institute, decided to observe personally. The ancient Vorthan had overseen education for over 2 centuries and had never encountered anything like the reports he was hearing. When Dean Morthick arrived at the training deck, he found Jake teaching the students about food preservation. The human had caught several fish from the stream and was demonstrating different ways to prepare them for long-term storage. Smoking the fish over a low fire removes moisture and adds preservatives from the wood smoke, Jake explained as he arranged thin fish fillets on a rack he had built from green branches. Salt would work better, but we don't have any available. Drying in the sun is another option, but it takes longer and only works in dry climates. Jake then showed them how to identify which plants had natural preservative properties. He crushed certain leaves and rubbed them on pieces of fish, explaining how the plant chemicals would help prevent spoilage. This technique can extend food storage time from days to weeks, he said. It's not perfect, but it can mean the difference between survival and starvation. Dean Morthick watched in growing amazement. Food preservation was a complex science taught in advanced nutrition courses. The chemical processes Jake was describing required detailed understanding of biochemistry, yet he presented them as practical knowledge anyone could use. During a break in the lesson, Dean Morthick approached Professor Zixtal with barely concealed concern. "Professor, what exactly is happening here?" The dean asked quietly. "These students are learning material that should take years to master, and they're understanding it after just a few days." Professor Zixtal's forearms moved in gestures of confusion and wonder. "Dean Morthick, I believe we have significantly underestimated human capabilities. Lieutenant Morrison treats our most advanced survival concepts as elementary knowledge." "That's impossible," the dean replied. "Our curriculum has been developed over centuries. It represents the accumulated knowledge of dozens of species. And yet," Professor Zixtal said, pointing toward Jake, "watch him teach." They observed as Jake demonstrated how to make a compass using a needle, a piece of cork, and water. He magnetized the needle by rubbing it against a piece of metal in a specific direction, then floated it on the cork in a bowl of water. "The magnetized needle will align with the planet's magnetic field," Jake explained to his fascinated students. "This gives you a consistent direction reference for navigation." Dean Morthick nearly fell over. Navigation was taught as a specialized, technical subject requiring sophisticated instruments. The idea that someone could create a navigational tool from basic materials was revolutionary. "Where did you learn that technique?" asked a winged collar student. "Boy Scouts," Jake replied casually. "It's a youth organization on Earth. Kids learn outdoor skills, citizenship, and leadership. This compass trick is pretty standard knowledge for anyone who spends time outdoors." The alien faculty members looked at each other in shock. A children's organization on Earth taught skills that their advanced students struggled to master as the simulation continued. Jake's teaching revealed more and more capabilities that the galactic educational system had never encountered. He showed students how to predict animal behavior by observing their feeding patterns. He demonstrated weather forecasting using cloud formations and wind changes. He taught them to identify medicinal plants and understand their properties. "This plant here," Jake said, holding up a common-looking leaf, "can be used to treat stomach problems. You chew it slowly, and swallow the juice. This other one helps with headaches if you make it into tea. The students gathered around eagerly, but the observing faculty members were beyond amazement. They were witnessing the collapse of their understanding of education itself. Dr. Kreshley from the medical department had been watching Jake's lesson on plant medicine. She approached him during another break, her tentacle-like arms writhing with agitation. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, "the botanical medicine you're teaching represents decades of specialized study in our curriculum. How can you present such complex information so simply?" Jake looked genuinely confused by the question. "Complex? It's just basic first aid. Every human learns some plant medicine as children. When you're hiking or camping, you might be hours away from proper medical help. You need to know how to treat common problems with whatever nature provides." "But the biochemical interactions," Dr. Kreshley protested, "the dosage calculations, the contraindications." "Look," Jake said patiently, "I'm not talking about complicated medicine, just simple remedies for common problems. Willow bark for pain, mint for upset stomach, that sort of thing. If someone has a serious medical emergency, you get them to a real doctor as fast as possible." Dr. Kreshley realized that what Jake considered simple remedies formed the basis of pharmacology. Humans apparently learned the practical applications of complex medical science as childhood safety knowledge. By the fifth day, the training deck had become an unofficial gathering place for faculty members. Professors from every department found reasons to observe Jake's class. What they witnessed challenged every assumption they had about education, knowledge, and species capabilities. Jake seemed completely unaware of the stir he was causing. He focused on his students, patiently answering their questions and encouraging them to try new skills. The young aliens had transformed from nervous, uncertain students into confident individuals who could handle challenging situations. "You're all doing great," Jake told them as they practiced making fire without matches. "Remember, the most important survival skill isn't any specific technique. It's the ability to stay calm, think clearly, and adapt to whatever situation you face." Professor Zixtal watched its human colleague with growing respect and bewilderment. In 5, the emergency faculty meeting was called for the morning of the 6th day. Dean Morthek sat at the head of a large conference table, his ancient features showing stress lines that his colleagues had never seen before. Around the table sat department heads, senior professors, and curriculum specialists from across the Galactic Educational Institute. "Colleagues," the dean began, his voice heavy with concern, "we face a crisis that threatens the foundation of our educational system. What we have observed in Lieutenant Morrison's class forces us to question everything we thought we knew about learning and capability." Dr. Veltar spoke first, her 3 eyes reflecting the worry that filled the room. "Dean Morthek, I have been teaching environmental sciences for 4 decades. In 5 days, this human has demonstrated practical applications of concepts that I struggle to convey to graduate students after months of study." Professor Hintel nodded in agreement. "The biological knowledge he displays casually exceeds our advanced curriculum. He identifies plant properties, animal behaviors, and ecological relationships as if they were common knowledge." "Because to him they are common knowledge," interrupted Dr. Kreshley from the medical department. "He learned these things as a child for basic safety. What we teach is specialized science. Humans learn as elementary survival skills." Dean Morthek raised one of his 4 arms for attention. "Dr. Volkov, as our human liaison, perhaps you can explain this phenomenon." Dr. Astrid Volkov, the only human faculty member present, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She had been dreading this conversation since the reports about Jake's teaching began circulating. "Colleagues," she began carefully, "I believe you are experiencing the reality of what we call Deathworld conditioning. Earth is classified as a Class 12 hazardous environment. Humans develop survival capabilities out of necessity, not choice. Class 12? Professor Zickstahl's crystalline features shimmered with shock. That classification is reserved for the most dangerous planets in known space. Surely you're exaggerating. Dr. Volkov shook her head sadly. Earth has extreme weather systems, aggressive predators, natural disasters, and environmental hazards that most species would find lethal. Human children learn survival skills because their lives literally depend on it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Finally, Professor Maureen from the physics department spoke up. Are you saying that Lieutenant Morrison's capabilities are typical for humans? Actually, Dr. Volkov replied, Jake represents baseline human preparedness. He's not exceptional by our standards. Any human with basic outdoor education would demonstrate similar skills. Dean Morthick felt ancient foundations crumbling in his mind. And what would you consider advanced human survival training? Doctor. Volkov thought for a moment. Specialized environments. Arctic survival in temperatures that would instantly freeze most species. Desert navigation across wastelands with no water for hundreds of kilometers. Jungle medicine using only indigenous plants. Deep water rescue operations. Combat survival behind enemy lines. The alien faculty members stared at her in horrified fascination. What she described as specialized human training was beyond anything they had ever conceived possible. We need to speak with Lieutenant Morrison directly, Dean Morthick decided. We must understand the full scope of this situation. An hour later, Jake sat in the conference room, looking slightly confused about why he had been called away from his class. The alien faculty members watched him with expressions ranging from awe to barely concealed fear. Lieutenant Morrison, Dean Morthick began carefully, we need to discuss your teaching methods. Your students are learning at a rate that seems impossible by our educational standards. Jake looked puzzled. Are they learning too fast? I can slow down if needed. I just want to make sure they understand the basics before we move on to more complicated stuff. More complicated? Dr. Valtar. Voice cracked slightly. Lieutenant, what you've taught in 5 days typically requires months or years of study. Really? Jake seemed genuinely surprised, but it's all pretty basic stuff. Shelter, water, food, fire. Any human child knows this by age 10 or 12. Professor Zickstahl leaned forward with its 4 arms spread in a gesture of confusion. Lieutenant Morrison, could you describe what you would consider advanced survival training? Jake thought for a moment. Well, advanced would be specialized environments. Like Arctic survival, where you might face temperatures 50 degrees below, freezing with hurricane-force winds. Or desert operations where you need to find water in places that haven't seen rain in years. The alien professors exchanged glances of mounting alarm. Or jungle survival, Jake continued, warming to the topic. Dense vegetation, dangerous animals, tropical diseases, limited visibility. You need to know advanced plant medicine, animal behavior, weather prediction, and navigation without instruments. Dr. Creshley's tentacle arms writhed in distress. And humans actually train for such conditions? Sure, Jake replied casually. Military personnel, explorers, researchers, emergency responders. Lots of professions require advanced environmental training. It's challenging, but not impossible if you build on the basics properly. Dean Morthick felt a growing sense of crisis. Lieutenant Morrison, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the difficulty of what you've been teaching our students? Jake considered the question seriously. Maybe a 2 or 3. It's fundamental knowledge that everyone should have. But it's not particularly challenging once you understand the principles. The room fell silent. What Jake rated as a 2 or 3 in difficulty had been the most challenging course in their entire curriculum. "What would be a 10? Asked Professor Maureen quietly. "Probably something like solo survival in the Antarctic. For months, or deep ocean survival after a shipwreck with no rescue expected," Jake replied. "Situations where you're completely on your own, with minimal resources in extremely hostile environments." Several alien professors made distressed sounds. Others simply stared in shock. Dr. Volkov decided to intervene before the situation got worse. "Jake, perhaps you should explain how human children learn these skills." "Oh, that's easy," Jake said, brightening. "Most kids start with family camping trips around age 5 or 6. Parents teach basic safety and outdoor skills. Then many join. Youth organizations like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, where they learn more advanced techniques." "Youth organizations?" Dean Morthick asked weakly. "Children's groups that teach outdoor skills, leadership, and citizenship," Jake explained. "Kids earn badges for demonstrating various capabilities. Camping, hiking, first aid, navigation, environmental science. It's pretty common." Professor Zixtal's crystalline surface was flickering rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "And this training is considered normal childhood education?" "Sure," Jake nodded. "Plus, most schools include outdoor education in their regular curriculum. Field trips, nature studies, emergency preparedness. By the time kids graduate, they have basic survival skills along with their academic education. The implications hit the faculty like a physical blow. Human children learned as standard education what their advanced students struggled to master." "Lieutenant Morrison," Dean Morthick said carefully, "we need to ask you a difficult question. How dangerous is your homeworld compared to other planets you've visited?" Jake scratched his head thoughtfully. "Well, I haven't visited that many planets yet, but Earth is probably more challenging than average. We have some pretty extreme weather systems, active geology, and diverse ecosystems with their own hazards." "Could you be more specific?" Dr. Veltar asked. "Sure," Jake replied. "We get hurricanes with winds over 200 kilometers per hour, tornadoes that can destroy entire towns, blizzards that dump meters of snow with sub-zero temperatures, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, floods, droughts. Then there are the biological hazards." The alien professors leaned forward despite their growing dread. "Predators like bears, wolves, large cats, venomous snakes, poisonous spiders, aggressive insects. Plants that can kill you if you touch them. Diseases carried by animals or insects. Ocean predators like sharks. Even the weather can be deadly if you're not prepared." Professor Hintal made a sound that might have been a whimper. "And human? Children grow up in this environment?" "Yes, but we teach them how to stay safe," Jake said reassuringly. "Basic precautions, recognition of dangerous situations, appropriate responses to emergencies. Most humans live their entire lives without serious problems because they know how to avoid or handle dangerous situations." Dean Morthick realized they were facing a complete paradigm shift. "Lieutenant Morrison, when you were assigned to teach our survival course, what did you expect?" "Honestly?" Jake looked a bit embarrassed. "I thought it would be pretty easy. Basic outdoor skills seemed like something any intelligent species would know naturally. I figured I'd just share some techniques and help students practice." "And now?" Dr. Volkov prompted gently. Jake looked around the room at the alien faces watching him intently. "Now I'm starting to understand that different species developed different capabilities based on their environments. What seems natural to humans might be extraordinary to others." "That's correct," Dean Morthick confirmed. "What you consider. Elementary knowledge represents the pinnacle of our advanced education. This creates a serious problem for our institution." 3 months after Jake's first survival class, Kepler Station buzzed with activity unlike anything in its history. The Galactic Educational Institute was undergoing the most comprehensive transformation ever attempted, and representatives from educational systems across the galaxy had come to observe the changes. Jake stood in his new office, looking out at the busy corridors filled with alien educators, administrators, and students. His simple assignment as an exchange instructor had evolved into something he never could have imagined. The brass nameplate on his door read, Director of Practical Applications, a position that had been created specifically for him, Professor. Zixtal entered the office, its 4 arms carrying data tablets and curriculum documents. Jake, the latest enrollment figures are remarkable. We have 3 times as many students applying for survival courses as ever before. How are the new instructors working out? Jake asked, referring to the additional human teachers who had been brought in to help with the expanded program. Excellently, Zixtal replied. Lieutenant Karen Walsh's Advanced Wilderness Medicine course is completely full. Sergeant Ben Parker's Extreme Environment Training has a waiting list. Commander Lisa Torres's Emergency Leadership Program is being copied by institutes on 12 different worlds. Jake shook his head in amazement. I still can't believe how much has changed. The transformation had been swift and dramatic. Within weeks of Jake's first class, the institute had restructured its entire curriculum. What had been advanced courses became foundational requirements. New programs were developed to challenge students who had mastered the basics. The old survival course became a prerequisite for more specialized training. The success rate in our programs has improved dramatically, Zixtal continued. Students who complete the new foundational courses show confidence and capability that we never saw before. Jake nodded, remembering his original class of 24 students. They had all passed the final simulation with flying colors, accomplishing feats that would have been impossible under the old system. More importantly, they had gained genuine confidence in their abilities to handle challenging situations. Are you ready for the graduation ceremony? Zixtal asked. Jake straightened his dress uniform. As ready as I'll ever be. I still feel strange being the keynote speaker. They walked together toward the main auditorium, where the largest graduation ceremony in the Institute's history was about to take place. Over 300 students from dozens of species were graduating from the new practical applications programs. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and distinguished visitors. Jake recognized several galactic dignitaries, education, ministers from various worlds, and even some military officials who had come to observe the new training methods. Dean Morthic took the podium first, his ancient features showing an energy and enthusiasm that had amazed his colleagues. Distinguished guests, faculty, and graduating students, today we celebrate not just individual achievement, but a fundamental shift in how we approach education and capability development. The dean gestured toward Jake, who sat in the front row with other honored speakers. 3 months ago, Lieutenant Jake Morrison arrived at our institute to teach what he considered basic survival skills. His humble assessment of his own knowledge has revolutionized our understanding of what students can achieve when challenged appropriately. Applause filled the auditorium, but Jake felt uncomfortable with the attention. He had simply done what came naturally to him. Today's graduates, Dean Morthic continued, represent the first class to complete our new integrated curriculum. They have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our former advanced students, and they have done so with confidence and competence that speaks to the effectiveness of practical education. When Jake's turn came to speak, he walked to the podium, feeling nervous but determined to deliver a message that honored both the students' achievements and the collaborative effort that had made them possible. Students, faculty, and distinguished guests, he began. 3 months ago, I thought I was coming here to teach basic camping skills. I had no idea that I would learn as much as I taught, or that together we would discover capabilities that none of us knew existed. He looked out at the graduating students, seeing faces he recognized from his original class, mixed with hundreds of others who had embraced the new educational approach. The most important thing I've learned here is that intelligence and capability exist in every species, but they need the right environment to flourish. You haven't succeeded because human teaching methods are superior. You've succeeded because you were given the opportunity to discover your own potential. Jake paused, gathering his thoughts. When I was growing up on Earth, my father told me that survival isn't about having the perfect equipment or knowing every possible technique. It's about adapting to whatever situation you face and never giving up. That principle applies to more than just wilderness survival. He gestured toward the diverse audience. Each of you comes from a different world, with different challenges and different natural advantages. The skills you've learned here aren't just about surviving in the wilderness. They're about approaching any problem with confidence, creativity, and determination. The graduating students listened intently, many taking notes even during the ceremony. But the real change isn't in what you've learned, Jake continued. It's in how you've learned to think. You've discovered that you're capable of more than you ever imagined. You've learned to trust your abilities and to work together to solve problems that seemed impossible. Jake looked toward the faculty section, where Professor Zixtal and other alien educators sat with expressions of pride and accomplishment. The faculty here deserves enormous credit for having the courage to completely restructure their approach to education. Change is difficult, especially when it means admitting that old methods weren't optimal. But they put student success ahead of institutional tradition, and that's why this transformation has been so successful. As Jake concluded his speech, he reflected on the broader implications of what had happened. The changes at Kepler Station were spreading throughout the galaxy. Other educational institutions were adopting similar approaches. Military training programs were being redesigned. Even civilian emergency preparedness was being reconsidered. In closing, Jake said, I want you to remember that graduation is not an ending, but a beginning. You've learned skills and gained confidence that will serve you throughout your lives. More importantly, you've learned that limitations are often just assumptions waiting to be challenged. The audience erupted in applause as Jake returned to his seat. The graduation ceremony continued with individual recognitions and presentations. But Jake's mind was already thinking ahead to the future. After the ceremony, Jake found himself surrounded by graduating students who wanted to thank him personally. A young Etherian named Lyra approached with tears in her large eyes. Lieutenant Morrison, she said, when I started your class, I was terrified. I thought I was too fragile to handle survival training. Now I know that being gentle doesn't mean being weak. You taught me to use my natural abilities as advantages rather than limitations. A rock-born student named Granite stepped forward. Sir, I always thought my species was too slow and clumsy for complex tasks. Your teaching showed me that steady patience and methodical thinking are valuable skills too. Similar comments came from students of every species. Jake realized that the real success wasn't in teaching specific techniques, but in helping students discover their own capabilities and build genuine confidence. Later that evening, Jake sat in the station's observation lounge with Professor Zixtal and Dr. Volkov, watching the stars and reflecting on the changes they had witnessed. What's next for the program? Dr. Volkov asked. Expansion, Zixtal replied. We're receiving requests from educational institutions across the galaxy. The Centauran Academy wants to establish a practical applications program. The Zephyrian Technical Institute is redesigning their engineering curriculum to include hands-on problem solving. Jake sipped his coffee, still amazed by the reach of the changes. I never imagined that teaching basic camping skills would lead to this. That's the beauty of it, Dr. Volkov said. You didn't try to revolutionize education. You just shared what you knew, and that authenticity made all the difference. Professor Zixtal's crystalline features reflected the starlight streaming through the observation windows. Jake, you've given us something precious. You've shown us that every species has capabilities waiting to be discovered. The key is creating the right environment for that discovery. As Jake prepared to return to Earth for a brief visit before his next assignment, he looked back on the transformation of Kepler Station with a mixture of pride and humility. He had come to teach basic survival skills and had instead learned about the unlimited potential that existed in every intelligent being. The Galactic Educational Institute would continue to grow and evolve, but the fundamental lesson would remain. True education isn't about transferring information from teacher to student. It's about creating opportunities for students to discover their own capabilities and build the confidence to use them. Jake Morrison, the human who had accidentally revolutionized galactic education, smiled as he